They said the moon turned red the night it began and it never left the sky. The same in the year 1853. Deep in the American South, the air was heavy with the smell of earth and smoke. Fields stretched endless and broken voices carried in the night. The sound of chains clinking against the ground, whispers spreading from cabin to cabin as the slaves looked up at the sky and saw something that made their hearts freeze. The moon was not the pale silver face they had always known. It was swollen. It was crimson. It was dripping like blood, and no one could explain why. The elders said it was a sign, a warning that the world was shifting, that something terrible was about to come, and the younger ones trembled, clutching each other in silence, because the air felt thick like it was pressing against their skin. The masters too saw the sky, and for a moment even they felt unease, but pride and cruelty hardened them. They laughed it off, called it foolish superstition, told themselves that no sky, no moon could touch their world of power, but deep down, fear gnawed at them, because men who live on cruelty are the ones who fear curses the most. That night the fields did not sleep. Voices murmured prayers in broken tones, songs of old lands. Long stolen, carried through the trees, the blood moon glowed over the fields, turning every blade of cane, every wooden beam, every face into something strange and ghostly. And though the night was quiet, there was something beneath it, a tension like the air before a storm. The girl with no name sat alone near the edge of the cabins, her eyes fixed on the sky. She had seen beatings. She had seen bodies dragged across the dirt, but she had never seen the heavens bleed. She felt something stirring, inside her a hunger, a flame that whispered, "You are not bound. You are not theirs anymore." She could not speak it out loud, but she felt it. And though chains clung to her wrists, though bruises darkened her skin, she sat taller under that moon as if its light was a crown only she could wear. The overseer walked by that night, his whip hanging loose in his hand, his boots crunching the soil. He spat at the sight of the moon, cursed at it as if it mocked him. He stopped before the girl, stared at her with suspicion, because there was something in her eyes that unsettled him. He raised his whip as if to strike, but then something in the air shifted. The dogs chained nearby whimpered. The wind fell dead, and though he heard nothing, he swore. He felt a hum soft and low like a song beneath the earth. He backed away, muttering that it was just the night, but fear followed him like a shadow, and the cabin's whispers grew darker. Some said the moon had chosen her, others said it was death itself, coming to walk among them, and still others prayed that the masters would fall, that blood would meet blood under the red sky. One old woman rocked back and forth, her voice thin, as she said, "The blood moon always takes its due, and when it rises it does not leave empty." For 3 nights. The moon stayed red for 3 nights. The earth felt uneasy, animals restless, masters drunker than usual, pretending not to care, yet locking their doors tighter than before, slaves praying harder, their voices rising louder as if to drown the silence, because the silence itself felt alive. The children asked their mothers why the moon looked so angry, and the mothers hushed them, pulled them close, told them to look away. But how can you look away from a sky that seems to watch you with a bleeding eye? On the 4th night, the first scream split the air, sharp and raw. It echoed from the fields and rolled through the cabins. Men jumped awake, women clutched their children. The overseer was found at dawn, his body lying in the dirt, his throat cut wide open, eyes bulging as if he had seen something that should not exist. His whip lay beside him, soaked in blood, and though the ground was muddy, no footprints marked the earth. The masters gathered, pale and shaken. Trying to find answers, they pointed fingers, accused. The slaves locked them tighter, beat them harder. But still they could not explain it. How could a man be torn open with no sound, no struggle, no witness except for the moon still bleeding? In the sky, rumors spread like fire. They said the girl with no name had done it, that she slipped from her chains and walked through shadows like water. Some swore they saw her moving between the trees, her shape bending the light. Others swore she had never moved an inch, that she sat still as stone, humming to herself, eyes glowing red with the reflection of the moon. But fear does not need proof. Fear grows on whispers, and whispers were all that filled the air every night after the killings. Fear spread deeper into the soil. It clung to the cabins. It crept into the big house. Even the masters could not shake it. They laughed less. They drank more. They avoided the girl. They refused to look at her. But she did not need their gaze. She only needed the moon, and the moon never looked away to the enslaved. The blood moon became a strange kind of hope. They did not understand it. They feared it, but they felt it, breaking something in the order of the world. The whips seemed weaker. The chains seemed thinner, and in the shadows of the fields they began to wonder if freedom was not only a dream, if freedom could come cloaked in blood. The story of that first night became legend passed in hushed tones. For years they said the moon turned red the night it began, and it never left the sky. The same. The fields never grew as they once did. The land never felt clean again. And the girl with no name became more than flesh. She became a warning, a promise, a ghost of vengeance that walked when the moon bled, and though time carried on, the memory of that night clung like a scar on the land itself. Who was she, a girl destined to die, or a ghost born too soon among the enslaved? There lived a young girl, but her name had long been stolen. From her some said she had once a name whispered by a mother who had not survived the journey across the waters. Others said she had been born into chains, never given the gift of a name at all, and so she became only a shadow among shadows, bought, sold, beaten like cattle, her body carrying the scars of men who owned her, but could never own the fire that still burned somewhere deep inside her. She was small and thin, bones sharp beneath skin that carried the marks of rope and lash, yet her eyes were something different. Her stare did not belong to a child. Her stare cut through the night like a blade. It unsettled even the hardest of men. She never cried. She never begged. She never spoke of pain. And that silence, that refusal to break, became her name. They called her the girl who doesn't cry. And in those words there was fear, because tears they understood. But silence. Silence was dangerous. The others in the cabins whispered about her when they thought she was not listening. They said she dreamed in ways no one else dreamed, that she walked in her sleep, her bare feet leaving no prints on the dirt floor. They said she stared at the moon for hours, as if speaking to it without words. And sometimes when she hummed the old songs, the fire would flicker. Though no wind blew, she had been passed from one hand to another, from one plantation to the next. And everywhere she went, men tried to crush her spirit. But something in her remained unbroken. She carried no memories of family, at least none she would speak of yet. There were moments when her face lifted, when she whispered sounds, not in English, sounds that came from across the sea, words that none of the masters could understand, but that made the other slaves shiver, as if they remembered something long buried. One woman who had seen many years said the girl was born under a bad star, that she carried the weight of spirits not meant for this world. Another said she was a vessel chosen by the blood moon, itself meant to carry out vengeance for all who had suffered. And the children believed these tales. They followed her from a distance. They feared her, yet could not look away, because in her they saw someone who belonged to them, and yet not to this earth. The masters feared her in their own way. They beat her harder than the rest. They locked her tighter at night. They watched her when she worked the fields, and still they felt uneasy, because they could not draw tears from her eyes. They could not hear her beg for mercy. She would look at them with those hollow eyes, and they felt small for a moment, as if their cruelty was a performance that meant nothing to her. When the blood moon rose for the first time, The slave said it was her night. Her eyes reflected the crimson glow as if the sky had chosen her personally. The children clutched their mothers, skirts whispering, "She is not one of us. She is something else." And the elders nodded, but they did not stop her when she walked outside and lifted her face to the sky, the chains on her wrists glinting red. She did not speak. She did not pray. She simply stared, and the longer she stared, the quieter the world became, until even the insects seemed to fall silent. One of the overseers once tried to break her. He dragged her out into the field in front of everyone. He struck her again and again until his arm grew tired, but she did not scream. She did not fall. She did not bleed the way he expected. She only looked at him, her eyes, empty yet endless, and he dropped his whip that day and walked away, muttering to himself. The other slaves never forgot that moment. They never forgot that even the lash could not bring her down. The girl who doesn't cry became more than a person. She became a myth growing while she still lived. Mothers warned their children not to cross her path at night, lest they follow her into dreams they could never return from. Men spoke her name in secret when they wanted courage, because to think of her was to remember that not even endless chains could crush the human spirit. But it was also to remember that such spirit came at a cost. Some said she was already dead, that she had died long ago, and what walked among them was only a shell, a ghost who had refused to leave this world until vengeance was done. Others believed she carried death inside her, that every beating, every cruelty she endured was swallowed not by her flesh but by some spirit within her waiting for the moment to strike back. And every time the blood moon rose brighter, the whispers grew stronger. The masters did not dare sell her again. She had passed through too many hands already. And each time tragedy followed, a barn burned, a son fell sick, a field flooded. They called it coincidence. But deep down, they wondered if she brought misfortune with her. And now that the red moon glowed above their heads, they watched her with shaking hands, wondering if her silence would finally break. The girl herself never told her story. She never spoke of where she had come from or why she did not cry. Her silence was heavier than any word, her gaze sharper than any blade. She lived and she endured and she waited, and all who looked upon her felt the same thought rise in their minds. Who was she, a girl destined to die, or a ghost born too soon? And so the night stretched on, and the fields remained soaked in sweat and blood. But in every shadow, every whisper, every shiver of wind, the presence of the girl lingered, reminding all that she was more than slave, more than victim. She was the silence before the storm. She was the breath held tight before the scream. She was the girl who doesn't cry, and to those who suffered she was hope, but to those who held the whip, she was the beginning of fear. It started with one, but it was only the beginning. The overseer was found at dawn, his body twisted in the dirt, his throat ripped wide open, eyes frozen in terror, as if he had seen something crawl from the shadows, something no human should have ever seen. His blood had soaked into the earth, leaving dark stains that seemed to glow under the red moon. The dogs refused to go near his body, their ears flat, their tails between their legs. They whined and pulled at their chains, as if even the scent of that blood was poison. The slaves were forced to stand in the fields and look upon him. The masters wanted them to see what had been done. They shouted at them, demanded to know who had risen in the night, who had dared strike against their rule. But silence held the air tight. No one spoke, no one moved, and still they looked at the girl, the one who never cried, the one whose eyes did not flinch at the sight of blood while the others trembled. She stood still, her stare deep, her face unreadable, and that silence cut sharper than any confession. The masters swore it was her. They said no one else had. The courage no one else carried, the curse of the blood moon. But how could she? They locked her every night with iron chains. They nailed her cabin shut. They kept a guard by her door. Still the overseer lay dead, his life stolen without a sound. No struggle, no footprints around him. Nothing but blood soaking into the soil beneath the red sky. Whispers spread through the cabins faster than fire. In dry grass, some said they had seen her shadow moving through the night, slipping between the cracks of the wood. Others said she had been humming low while the dogs barked at nothing, her eyes glowing red like the moon. And though every lock had been closed tight somehow, she had walked free as if no wall could hold her. The masters grew restless, their fear hidden behind rage. They beat the slaves harder that day, demanding answers, as if pain could force a truth that did not exist. The blood moon hung heavy above them. Watching them with its bleeding eye, the slaves prayed in silence, whispering old words from lands long gone, their voices low enough not to be heard, but heavy enough to be felt. They believed the overseer had not been killed by any man, but by death itself. Walking in the shape of the girl who never cried, the children clung to their mothers, afraid to close their eyes, afraid to open them. They asked if the girl was still one of them, or if she had already crossed into another world where chains could not hold her. The mothers had no answers, their hearts torn between fear and hope, between the terror of her power and the dream that maybe, just maybe, she had struck the first blow of freedom. That night the masters locked her tighter. They doubled the guards around her cabin, hammered the door shut until the wood splintered. They checked the chains again and again, making sure they cut into her wrists. They spat at her, called her cursed, called her devil spawn. But she never spoke. She never fought. She only watched them with those empty, endless eyes. And when they left, some swore they heard her laugh low and broken, though no sound crossed her lips in the dark silence of the night. The red moon glared through the cracks of the wood, and her shadow stretched across the floor. Her chains rattled, though she did not move, and outside the fields shivered, as if the land itself remembered blood. The overseer was buried quickly with no prayers, only curses and warnings. The masters tried to dismiss it as madness, as rebellion waiting to rise. They told themselves, a man must have done it, a knife, a grudge, a hidden hand. But in their hearts they knew the truth. No one had seen anything. No sound. No struggle, only the body and the girl who never cried sitting in her chains, untouched by the night. And yet somehow, bound to its every secret, the slaves could not stop whispering about it, each voice adding to the story. Some swore she was seen standing in the fields with the moon behind her, her shadow stretching longer than any human shadow should stretch. Some swore she vanished into the trees and returned before dawn. Some believed she never moved at all, that her spirit walked while her body stayed locked away, and that the red moon itself carried her wherever it wished. Fear grew heavier every hour. The masters drank more, their hands shaking on their cups. They swore they would break her before the next night. They swore they would show her no mercy. But when they tried to look into her eyes, their words faltered because she did not look at them. As a slave looks at her master, she looked at them as if they were already dead men walking. The field seemed different after that day. Every sound sharper, every shadow darker. The cane rustled, though no wind blew. The air carried whispers that did not belong to any tongue. The slaves worked with heads bowed, but their minds churned with thoughts of escape, of revolt, of freedom. Because if the girl truly had done this, then perhaps chains were not stronger than will. Perhaps the blood moon had brought a reckoning that no whip could silence. And so the story of the first death grew larger than the truth. It was no longer just the overseer lying in the dirt. It was the beginning of something greater, something that promised either salvation or damnation, depending on which side of the lash you stood, and every man, woman, and child felt it in their bones. The overseer was only the first. It started with one, but it was only the beginning. The slave said she wasn't chained at all, not when the moon rose that night. The air hung thick with the smell of earth and smoke. The wind carried whispers that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. They said they had seen her shadow moving through the cabins, slipping past iron bars and locked doors, as if the wood and metal were nothing more than mist. Her bare feet left no prints in the dust, no marks, no sign that she had ever touched the floor. Yet somehow every lock, every chain, every guard that watched over her was powerless, under the gaze of the blood moon. Some said the walls themselves shivered when she passed through them. Doors creaked and windows rattled, though no one touched them. The fire in the hearths flickered violently, as if reacting to her presence, and the children huddled under blankets, whispering to each other that she was no longer a girl. She was something else, something born from the moon, something older than the earth itself. The elders nodded silently because they had seen strange things in their years on the plantations, things that could not be explained, but they had never seen anything like this before. The masters cursed and swore at the shadows that moved too quickly at the sound of footsteps that couldn't belong to anyone. They beat the air with whips, trying to punish the darkness, as if fear could be whipped out of the world. But the girl stood beyond it untouched. She watched through windows. She walked along halls. She touched nothing, yet everything seemed to respond. To her presence, the blood moon reflected in her eyes made them glow red, and for a moment even the cruelest men felt a chill run down their spines. The slaves whispered among themselves that the chains that bound her were only a story made for them, to believe she was still their sister, still their friend, still trapped. But when the moon rose high above the fields, they saw what no one could deny. She was free in ways that no human had ever been free. She moved through the air like smoke. She slid past walls like water. She vanished into the night and left nothing behind but a sense of awe and fear that settled deep in the chest and did not leave for days. The blood moon had given her freedom. They said freedom through death, a freedom that belonged not to flesh, but to something else, a spirit that could not be caged. They did not understand it fully, but they felt it in their bones. The whip that struck them seemed lighter somehow. The chains that bound them seemed to rattle with the echo of her passing, and for the first time some of them dared to hope that perhaps the world was not as cruel as it seemed, that perhaps the girl who never cried could show them a way to survive, a way to endure. The masters tried to rationalize it. They called it trickery. They accused the slaves of lying. They searched the cabins, the fields, the forests, trying to find her tracks. But there were none. Every nail, every lock, every chain was accounted for, and still she moved free as if she had never been bound. The red moon hung above them, casting long shadows over everything, turning the plantation into a place that felt haunted, even in the daylight. The elders said she was chosen by the moon, that she had been marked before she had even been born, that the spirits of the earth had whispered to her in her sleep, and had taught her the secrets of movement and silence, of walking where no one could follow, of leaving no trace, of touching no floor, no wall, no door, no chain, that she was more than human, more than girl, more than slave, and that the blood moon was only the beginning of her power. The children told stories that spread through the cabins like fire. They said she had walked through the big house and the kitchen and the barns, her shadow stretching and bending like it had a life of its own. They said she had passed the overseer's quarters while men slept and had been gone by the time they woke. Some swore they saw her reflection in mirrors that no one had looked into. She was there and not there. At the same time, she was a ghost and yet alive. The slaves prayed quietly. They asked for protection. They asked for strength. They asked for her guidance. They whispered names to the moon, hoping that she would hear them, hoping that she would teach them to be strong like her. They did not know what she was, or how she had become what she was. But they felt in their hearts that she carried their hopes, their fears, and perhaps even their vengeance. And so the nights passed with the blood moon hanging low and red above the fields, and the girl moved as if the world itself had bent to let her pass. She was untouchable, unbroken, unbound, and yet everywhere she went she left a trace not of footsteps, but of change, a ripple in the air, a pause in the heart, a shiver in the spine. The masters could not stop her. They could not catch her. They could not explain her, and every night the slaves watched in awe and fear as she walked freely through the prison of their world. They said the moon had given her freedom, freedom through death, and the words were whispered from cabin to cabin, repeated in every corner of the plantation. Because once you had seen her move, once you had felt the air bend around her, once you had understood that the chains that bound her were lies, you could never forget it, and the world was never the same again. The killings followed the moon one body for every rising. The night after the overseer fell, the plantation seemed to hold its breath. The wind moved differently. The trees whispered, and the shadows stretched long and dark over the fields. The slaves whispered among themselves, warning each other to stay close to the cabins to keep their eyes on the sky. But the moon hung low and red, its glow spilling over everything, turning the familiar land into a place of fear and wonder. That night, the plantation owner's son was found dead, his chest ripped open as if some great beast had clawed at him, though no one saw or heard anything. Not a scream, not a struggle. Only the stillness of a body broken beyond recognition, and the blood that soaked the ground beneath the crimson moon. The masters screamed. They called for their men. They searched the fields. They cursed the slaves. They demanded answers, but the girl who never cried remained in her corner, eyes fixed on the moon, humming softly, as if she could summon or control what had come. The slaves trembled in silence. They knew the stories of her power, the way she moved unseen, the way she seemed to exist both here and elsewhere. At once they had whispered about it, but to see it was different to feel it in the night air, to watch a life taken without any human hand or voice. It pressed against their chests like a weight they could not lift and still. She hummed soft, low notes that seemed to belong to the wind itself, to the rustling of the cane, to the beating of their hearts. The masters were frantic, locking doors, checking chains, nailing windows, boarding cabins. They watched her constantly, believing that somehow she had orchestrated the death from her corner. They did not dare approach her. She did not move. She did not plead. She only hummed a tune that carried across the fields, haunting every listener. The children cried quietly. Their mothers held them tight, but even the mothers shivered because something in that humming sounded like mourning and laughter all at once, as if the girl carried the grief of the world inside her small chest. Some of the elders whispered that she had been chosen by the moon, that she had been marked to bring justice, that she was no longer a girl of flesh alone, but a vessel for something older than time itself, that each life taken under the blood moon was not murder, but reckoning, that each body was a message sent from the shadows of history itself. And the slaves listened and nodded, even as terror gripped their hearts, because they knew the truth in the silence and the way the wind carried her song. The plantation dogs whimpered in corners and refused to go near the corpses, their tails low, their ears flat, and they stared at the girl as if expecting her to rise and walk among them. They refused to follow orders to track her. They would not obey their masters, because instinct told them something was wrong, something unnatural, something alive in the air and in the shadows. And when the moonlight caught her eyes glowing red, even the most hardened men shivered and backed away. Everywhere on the plantation the atmosphere shifted. The soil seemed darker. The trees bent slightly as if bowing in her presence. The cabins felt smaller, the air tighter. The night itself seemed to lean in. Listening to her humming and the bodies left behind became more than corpses. They were warnings. They were signals. They were proof that the moon had chosen her, that the world had changed, that the girl who never cried was now an agent of something beyond their comprehension. The masters tried to rationalize it, saying it was a hidden hand, a slave uprising, a pack of wild animals. But deep down they knew the truth. No whip, no guard, no chain could explain what had happened, no plan. No trick could account for the stillness in her corner and the soft humming that seemed to carry death across the fields. The blood moon reflected in her eyes, turning them into coals, glowing red and unyielding. And the longer they stared, the longer the fear rooted in their chests, growing stronger with each passing heartbeat. The slaves, however, felt a strange mixture of fear and awe. They kept distance, but their eyes never left her. They understood something that the masters could not. That power could exist beyond flesh. That chains could bind bodies, but never spirits. That the girl who never cried was free in ways they could not comprehend. And each death under the blood moon strengthened the legend that she carried a force greater than any whip, greater than any master, greater than any law of man. The night carried on, with a strange and terrible quietness punctuated by the occasional rustle of cane or the soft hum that rolled like a river across the plantation. The bodies were found and buried quickly, but their presence lingered. The soil smelled of iron and fear, and no one dared speak of the events except in whispers, and even then they spoke with the caution of one who knows the air itself can betray them. The girl did not move. She did not flee. She hummed, and the wind carried it for miles across the fields, making every shadow tremble, making every living thing pause and listen. The following days were tense. The masters grew more paranoid, watching her every moment, thinking that the next death was already decided, that the moon was still rising, and the blood that had been shed demanded more, and the slaves waited in silence for another night, wondering if the girl herself moved freely, or if some unseen hand guided her from afar, if the blood moon had made her more than human, if she had become a spirit, walking on earth in human shape. And they did not fear her for cruelty. They feared her for what she had become, for what she represented, for the freedom no chain could hold. And so the killings continued in stories and whispers. In fear and fascination, the girl remained a silent center to the chaos, unmoved, unshaken. The blood moon rose and fell, and with every rising a body was taken, and every soul on the plantation understood in some dark, quiet corner of their minds that the girl who never cried was no longer a girl, but a force. The beginnings of a reckoning, and the killings followed the moon, one body for every rising. They tried to kill her. But how do you burn a ghost? The masters decided that enough was enough, that no more deaths would go unanswered, that the girl who never cried must pay for what had happened. They tied her to a post in the center of the yard, the blood moon hanging low and red above them, casting its eerie glow on every face and every shadow. Her wrists bound with rope, the wood piled high around her body, and the air thick with smoke and tension. Every master shouting, cursing, spitting threats into the night, as if their voices could summon the courage to end her. The slaves watched from a distance, hidden in the shadows, hearts pounding with fear and hope, wondering if she would finally fall, if the chains and flames would take her life away. And yet, even as the fire was lit and flames roared upward, licking her skin, and smoke swirled thick and black around her body, they could feel a shift in the air, a vibration like the earth itself was holding its breath. The wind bent around her. The leaves on the trees did not rustle, but they quivered, and the smell of burning wood mixed with something older, something raw, something alive. The flames crackled higher, licking at the ropes, at the wood, at the very ground around her. But the girl remained still, her eyes fixed on the blood moon, her lips moving softly, whispering words no one could hear her. whispering a song older than the plantation, older than the masters, older than the chains themselves. Her hair floated around her, face not burning, not singed, not even scorched. The heat that seared and roared as if it demanded to consume her could not touch her. She did not scream. She did not flinch. She did not cry. The masters leaned in closer, shouting threats, grabbing sticks, hitting the ground, striking the ropes, but each blow seemed to bounce off her invisible shield, as if the fire and wood were nothing more than illusions, as if their rage had no substance in the presence of something beyond their understanding. The white flames licked the air around her, casting shadows that danced wildly, but when she looked at them, her eyes glowed red, reflecting the blood moon. The light seemed to bend around her body. The ropes hung loosely, but did not burn. The smoke curled around her and then rose straight into the sky without touching her form. The slaves whispered prayers under their breaths, hoping silently that she would not be harmed, hoping that the power she carried was stronger than anything the masters could muster. And even as the fire roared higher, they began to notice that the heat did not reach her, that her shadow stretched unnaturally long, that the air near her smelled different than the rest of the flames, as if the world itself had divided her from the destruction surrounding her, and they shivered both in awe and terror at what they were witnessing. For hours the fire blazed, and the night seemed to stretch endlessly, the blood moon watching from above like a sentinel. The girl did not move, but the air around her seemed alive, alive with whispers, alive with warnings, alive with a force that none could name, but all could feel. The masters were exhausted, sweating, shaking their hands raw from beating the air. And ropes. Still, the girl remained, standing calm, serene, untouched. Like a statue carved from the night itself, the flames had eaten the wood, yet left her perfect and whole. Then the fire began to die. Slowly, smoke rising in thick columns into the night sky, the red glow of the moon, reflected in the ash, the slaves holding their breath, the masters panting and trembling, thinking, finally the end had come. And yet the girl lifted her head, her lips moving soft and deliberate words. "I am already free," she whispered, though no one could hear it all, could feel it in the marrow of their bones, in the air, in the smell of smoke, in the silence that followed her voice. A promise, her declaration, her victory. The masters stepped back, fear in their eyes. They could not touch her. They could not break her. They could not understand what they had seen. The chains had been useless. The fire had been powerless. The night itself had bent to her will, and the girl slowly stepped down from the post as if it had never held her. She did not glance at the men who had tried to kill her. She did not speak to the slaves who had hidden and watched. She only looked at the blood moon, her eyes red with its reflection, and for the first time she smiled softly, a small curl of her lips, and then she walked away, her feet leaving no mark on the earth. The slaves ran to her after the masters had fled, some whispering her name, some just holding her hands to feel the warmth of flesh that had endured the impossible. She did not speak. She only moved silently through the cabins, through the fields, through the cane, the wind bending to her presence, the night itself parting for her. And when they looked back, the post stood charred and empty. The flames consumed nothing but the wood and ash. The girl was gone, but the echo of her freedom lingered like smoke rising into the blood moonlit sky. From that night on, stories spread across the plantations, stories of a girl who could not be chained, who could not be burned, who had been chosen by the moon, who moved like shadow through walls, through fire, through the night itself, a force older than cruelty, older than death, older than chains. She had become more than girl, more than slave, more than flesh. She had become legend, a ghost walking the earth with her eyes glowing red and her whispers carrying across the fields. I am already free, and the world would never forget it. Some chains are made of iron. Hers were made of blood that night. The air felt heavier than usual. The plantation, wrapped in shadows that seemed to breathe and stretch over the cabins and fields. The slaves huddled together, their eyes darting to every movement of the cane, every whisper of wind, every rustle in the trees, because something had changed. Something. Beyond comprehension, the girl who never cried had vanished. Her shackles lay broken in the dirt, twisted and torn, as if the metal itself had given up, resisting her strength. But no one saw her leave. No one could trace her footsteps, and yet the air seemed charged with her presence. The dogs whined at first, and then howled at shadows that slithered between the trees, their fur bristling, their eyes wide as if they could see something invisible to human eyes. They refused to follow the trails. They refused to obey their master's commands, and the men cursed at them, banging sticks on the ground, shouting threats into the night. But instinct had taken hold. The animals would not move toward the girl, not toward the blood moon, not toward the shadows that moved as if alive, and the slaves watched in silence, heartbeats thudding in their chests, their stomachs tight with both hope and fear. The cabins were dark and silent except for the whispers of those who had survived the nights before. The elders spoke of freedom in quiet tones, their voices low but urgent. They said her chains had never been real, that her body had been bound by nothing more than fear, that the blood that stained the earth and the wood had marked her and given her the power to move beyond walls, to slip past iron and rope, to walk among shadows, and that her footsteps left no trace, because she had become more than flesh, more than human, more than slave. She had become a force that could not be contained. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, their small hands clutching each other tightly. They whispered that the girl was a ghost, that she moved with the wind, that she carried the blood moon in her eyes. And the slaves felt something stir in their hearts for the first time since the overseer and the plantation owner's son had died. They felt hope, because if she could escape, if she could move unseen, if she could survive fire and chains, then perhaps they could dream of freedom as well. But fear came with it. Fear of the unknown. Fear of the power she had become. Fear that the masters would turn their wrath onto them if they dared follow her example. The masters searched through the night, pounding on doors, throwing torches into the cane, beating the earth with their fists, but there was nothing, nothing to find. No footprints, no sound, no clue, except the broken shackles lying in the dirt. They cursed and swore that the girl could not have done it, that she could not have escaped the fire, the chains, the guards. But in the corner of every mind, the truth lurked, hidden, a terrible truth, that even they could not face that. Somehow she had become untouchable. Somehow she had moved beyond the realm of men. The blood moon glowed above the plantation, casting long red shadows over the cabins and fields. The wind carried whispers and soft hums as if the girl herself had left echoes in the night air, and the slaves listened and trembled. They felt the power of her movement. They felt the air bend around her, and in that moment they realized that chains of iron could never hold what blood and will, and the moon had freed that some forces could not be stopped, no matter how many doors were nailed shut, no matter how many guards stood watch, no matter how many fires roared into the night. As the night stretched into hours, the animals remained restless, the dogs continued their howls, the horses stamped in their stalls as if sensing her presence, moving unseen among the trees between shadows. The slaves held their breath, watching every corner of the plantation, waiting for something to appear. But nothing came except the feeling that she was everywhere and nowhere at once, that the air itself had been touched by her freedom, and that those who had once cowered before iron and fire could now dream of escape. The elders spoke of old stories whispered in the wind of children who carried the blood of spirits in their veins, of women who moved through walls, of men who vanished and returned with the knowledge of the world beyond the chains. And the girl who never cried now became a living part of those tales, a legend that breathed through the plantation, through the slaves, through the earth itself, and every glance toward the red moon reminded them that she had become something impossible to capture, something impossible to break, something that belonged to the night itself. And so the slaves waited in silence for the coming days, their hearts torn between hope and fear. They dared not speak too loudly about her escape, but each whispered word carried a spark of rebellion. Each glance at the sky reminded them that the girl who never cried had transcended the chains that had held them all, and that perhaps one day freedom could follow in her wake. If they were brave enough, if they dared to believe in what they had seen. The masters grew frantic, their paranoia deepening with every passing hour. They searched every cabin, every field, every tree line, every shadow. They called for the girl. They shouted her name, but she did not return. She had vanished beyond their sight, beyond their reach, and every broken shackle left in the dirt was a reminder that their power had limits, and that the blood moon had marked the beginning of a reckoning that no man could stop. And though the girl was gone, her presence lingered in every whisper, in the rustle of the cane, in the restless night air. The slaves felt it like a pulse in their hearts, a reminder that some chains are made of iron and can be broken by force, but hers were made of blood, forged by the moon, by suffering, by power beyond comprehension. And in that knowledge, hope and fear walked hand in hand through every cabin, every field, every mind, as they realized that the girl who never cried had become untouchable and unstoppable, and the world would never be the same again. By dawn, the house was silent. Too silent, the kind of silence that crawls into your bones and makes you afraid to breathe, as if even the air itself had been swallowed by some unseen hand. The plantation stood in ruins, smoke still curling into the pale sky like ghostly fingers reaching upward, begging for release. And inside the charred remains of the grand house lay the masters and the overseers, their bodies broken, twisted in shapes no human body should ever take, their faces frozen in terror, their eyes black as if something had reached inside and burned the soul away. The villagers whispered from a distance. No one dared step too close. They said it was the girl, the one everyone believed had perished long ago. Some swore they had seen her figure in the red glow of the blood moon, her hair wild, her face shadowed by fury and grief. They said she returned not of flesh, but of something else, something darker. Some claimed it was not she at all, but death itself, walking beside her, guiding her hand and claiming every soul that had once raised a whip or a cruel word against the helpless. The night before, the fire had raged with a hunger that seemed alive. Flames licked the sky higher and higher, while the screams inside carried across the fields. But none who heard them moved to help, for the land was cursed, and they all knew it. The slaves who had survived generations of cruelty had prayed and bled into that soil. The ground itself drank their suffering, and now at last it answered in the most merciless way. When the dawn arrived, those who gathered at the edge of the property trembled at what they saw. The house was nothing but blackened skeleton beams still smoldering, the air thick with ash and the stench of burnt flesh. Yet the strangest sight was not the ruins, but the dead, their limbs bent at impossible angles, spines arched like broken branches, mouths open wide as if caught mid-scream. And the eyes, oh the eyes, hollow pits of endless night. One glance was enough to make the strongest man stagger back. With a Christeries began to spread. Like wildfire, one tale claimed the girl had once been a servant, beaten until her body could take no more. Her name whispered in sorrow, though none dared say it aloud. Now she had returned under the blood moon to keep the promise she made before. Death claimed her. She would not rest until every hand that struck her, every mouth that cursed her, every master who thrived on her suffering, paid with agony. Tenfold another story said that the land itself rose up, that the soil saturated with blood, gave birth to vengeance that took the form of the girl and walked through the fire unburned. People who watched from the safety of the trees swore they saw shadows moving among the flames. Shadows that did not belong to any man or woman. They slid across the walls and danced with the fire, like dark spirits celebrating, and within the crackling blaze came a sound faint, at first, then louder, a laugh high and sharp, the laugh of a young girl that dissolved into a scream that rattled the bones of all who heard it. Since that night no one dared rebuild on that ground. A few brave or foolish souls tried. They cut down the scorched wood, they laid new stone, but within days they disappeared or returned, broken, mumbling, incoherent words, their eyes glazed with the same blackness as the dead masters, their families would say. They spoke of a girl standing at the foot of their beds, her face pale, her hands dripping red, whispering in a voice that was not entirely human. To this day, whenever the blood moon rises, people in the nearby village bar their doors and shutter their windows. They say the air fills with the smell of smoke and iron. They say they hear the faint sound of laughter carried by the wind. And if you are foolish enough to stand beneath the red glow and listen closely, you will hear the echoes of screams coming from the plantation ruins, as if the night of fire is forever trapped, replaying over and over beneath the cursed moon. They say vengeance never truly dies. It lingers waiting for the right night, the right shadow, and the right silence to return. And those who once thought the girl was gone now know she never left. She walks the land bound to it by rage and sorrow, a spirit forged in cruelty who became something far stronger than death itself. But did she truly escape, or did she never die at all? This question burned in the minds of those who survived that night of fire and screams. Some said they saw her vanish into the smoke as if the flames themselves opened a path for her. Others swore they buried her body with their own hands long before the plantation burned. Yet the stories refused to die. They clung to every whisper, every shadow, every cry carried on the wind, as if the land itself would not let her go. The survivors spoke of nights when the cane fields shivered, though no breeze stirred the stalks. They swore they heard her voice rising from the darkness, a soft broken melody that bent the air with sorrow and rage. It was not a song of comfort but a lament, a dirge that wrapped around the hearts of those who heard it and filled them with dread. Men would stop in their tracks, eyes wide, ears straining to catch each fragile note. Some said it was the sound of grief. Others claimed it was the call of vengeance, drawing the living closer to their doom. As years passed, the stories only grew sharper. Children born long after the fire spoke of seeing a woman wandering the rows of cane at night. She had no face, they said, only a blank pale void where her features should have been, and she dragged chains softly behind her with each step, the sound light yet endless, like the memory of shackles that could never be broken. Some children wept in their beds when the moonlight touched their windows, swearing they saw her silhouette framed in silver, standing perfectly still as if watching them from the fields. The elders warned their young to stay away from the plantation ruins when the moon was high, especially when its light turned red with blood. They told them to close their ears to the singing, for if you listened too long, your own voice would wither away until nothing came out but a whisper, and then silence forever. They told them not to follow the sound of chains, for if you walked too far into the dark, you would never return, and your body would be found twisted and black-eyed just like the masters of old. And still, the questions haunted every tale: had she escaped, or had she never died at all? Some said she struck a bargain with death itself, and that death favored her more than the masters who wielded the whip. Others believed her body fell, but her spirit refused to yield. Tethered to the land by the weight of her torment, unable to rest until her chains became the chains of her enemies. Those who dared pass near the fields after sundown carried strange stories back with them. One man swore he saw the stalks bending away from something moving through them, though nothing stood before his eyes. Another claimed that as he walked the path past the ruins, he felt a hand brush against his shoulder, light and cold like mist, yet heavy with intent, and when he turned, no one was there. Only the faint sound of a girl singing, close enough to freeze his blood. Families who lived nearby began leaving offerings at the edge of the fields, bowls of food, jugs of water, scraps of cloth. Anything that might soothe her wandering spirit. They whispered prayers into the soil, begging her to pass them by to keep her song away from their homes. And for a time the night seemed quiet, but soon the offerings went untouched and the singing returned stronger than before. As if her hunger had grown deeper than any gift could fill, the faceless woman became more than a tale. She became a warning. She was the embodiment of every cruelty inflicted upon the helpless, a reminder carved into the earth itself. Mothers used her name to hush their children into obedience. Yet in the same breath they spoke with a kind of reverence, because deep inside they knew she was not only a monster, she was justice twisted and unrelenting, a justice born from suffering that no man could ever undo. Some say she still waits for those who carry the blood of the masters in their veins, that when they step foot near the ruins, her song turns sweet and soft, luring them closer with a promise of peace, only for the chains to wrap tight around their ankles, pulling them into the cane, never to be seen again. Others claim she follows soldiers and overseers who raise their hands in cruelty, punishing them in ways no court or law ever could, and so the legend lives on. It grows with every retelling, whispered in the dark by firelight, spoken under the breath when the moon turns red. Was she ever truly gone, or had she never left at all? Perhaps she walks even now, her song drifting across the fields, her chains whispering through the soil, a reminder that vengeance does not die, it only waits. It only sings. And to this day they say the red moon still remembers her name. The years have turned to decades, and the decades into centuries, yet the legend has never loosened its grip on the people of the South. When the blood moon rises, they bar their windows, they nail their doors shut, they whisper prayers into the dark corners of their homes, because they know that on such nights she walks again. They say she walks free from the chains that once cut into her flesh, yet bound forever to vengeance that burns deeper than bone. Some believe her body died long ago, and in that death she found her freedom. They say she slipped through the grasp of her masters and into the arms of the night itself, and in that embrace she became something more than flesh, something more than spirit. She became a force carried on the wind, in the cry of owls, in the sway of the cane fields, in the howl of the hounds that shiver without reason. Others whisper darker things. They claim she never escaped at all, that the lash and the chains never loosened their hold on her, that her spirit remains tangled in the earth itself, in the roots of the fields, in the broken beams of the plantation that burned and collapsed. They say her voice can still be heard between the stalks, when the night is still a low song of sorrow rising and falling like breath, a melody too broken to soothe, yet too beautiful to ignore. Those who claim to have heard it speak with eyes wide and voices hushed. They say the song clings to your skin long after the sound fades. It lingers in the back of your mind like a memory you never lived, and it calls you back again and again until you cannot resist stepping into the fields, and those who step too far are seldom seen again. Some are found days later wandering aimlessly, eyes dark, voices stolen, unable to tell where they had gone, only muttering of a faceless girl with silver light upon her hair and chains whispering at her feet. Children are warned to keep away from the fields when the moon turns red. Mothers hush them with tales of the faceless woman who waits in the dark. With her song, They are told that if they follow the sound, they will be bound just as she was, that the chains she drags will coil around their ankles and pull them into the soil, where screams never reach the air, and silence is eternal. Yet in the same breath some of those mothers will touch the earth softly and murmur words of respect because deep inside they know she was not born a monster. She was made one. The old people say her blood still stains the soil of the plantation where she fell. They say her suffering sank into the roots of the cane and into the wood of the cabins, so that the land itself remembers her, so that the land itself cries out for her. They believe that the red moon does not rise by chance but by memory. It remembers her name. It calls her back again and again. And each time she answers, a few brave or foolish souls have tried to challenge the legend. They have gone into the fields when the blood moon burned high above. They carried lanterns and rifles. They laughed at the warnings of the elders. They said no ghost could harm them, and yet none returned whole. Some were found with bodies twisted and eyes black. Some were never found at all. And the ones who staggered back alive whispered that they had heard chains dragging behind them. Though no footsteps followed, they swore that a voice sang their name in the dark and that the song would not stop echoing in their ears. The blood moon nights have become sacred and feared in equal measure. In some villages, people leave offerings at the edge of the fields, bread, water, flowers, pieces of cloth. They whisper her name, though never too loudly, hoping the gifts will appease her, hoping the song will pass them by. Sometimes the offerings are gone by morning. Other times they remain untouched, wilted, and wasted. And when that happens, the people know that someone will vanish before the next dawn. Scholars and travelers from the cities have come to the south, seeking to explain the tales they speak of, folklore and superstition, of stories meant to frighten children. But when they stay the night and hear the faint song on the wind, their faces pale and their words falter. Some leave before the moon sets, unwilling to admit what they felt. Others stay but never speak of it again, as if silence is the only shield they have. So the question endures: did she escape through death, or did she never escape at all? Was her spirit freed to roam the night, or shackled forever to the land of her torment? Did she find power in her suffering, or is she doomed to wander until the end of days? Each answer is wrapped in fear and reverence. Each telling of her story is both warning and prayer. And to this day, when the red moon climbs the sky, the south grows quiet. Doors close, windows darken the cane, fields sway with a rhythm that seems alive, and in the distance, if the night is still enough, you might hear her song carrying across the earth, thin and broken, yet sharp enough to cut into your soul. And if you listen too long, you may find her standing before you, faceless and patient, chains at her feet, waiting for you to join her. And to this day they say the red moon still remembers her name.